Ing Shui walked out of the hospital, glaring back angrily at the window on the third floor while carefully placing the newly prescribed medication into her backpack. Her home was in the outskirts beyond the fifth ring, while this psychiatric hospital was located in the city center within the second ring. Every time she came for her medication, it required 3 bus transfers and 2 subway rides, taking a total of 3 hours. As she walked toward the subway station, Ing Shui muttered to herself in frustration. "I'm obsessive? Dr. Qi, you're more obsessive than I am. Can't you just prescribe me a month's supply at a time? Why must you make me come every 2 weeks as punishment? You keep saying my anxiety is getting worse. Who wouldn't be anxious with a doctor like you?" It was the end of January, the coldest time of the year. The zipper on Ing Shui's down jacket was loose, and no matter how hard she tried, it wouldn't zip up to her neck. The northwest wind whistled in, chilling her to the bone, making her teeth chatter. Ing Shui stubbornly gripped the zipper, quickening her pace toward the subway entrance. This down jacket was a gift from her sister Ing Mei when she graduated from college. Its style had long gone out of fashion, but Ing Shui refused to replace it. It was the only thing her sister had left her. No, not the only thing. Her depression also came from her sister. While waiting for the train, Ing Shui's thoughts wandered. Tomorrow was the anniversary of her sister's death. It had been 5 years since her sister passed away. Thinking about her sister's death brought tears to Ing Shui's eyes. How could someone so healthy and beautiful have died in such a tragic way? Ing Shui rented a small, secluded house in the suburbs. It was quite remote. 1 kilometer to the left was a vegetable picking farm, and 1 kilometer to the right was a chicken farm. There were hardly any people around. 3 years ago, Ing Shui found a job that didn't require her to go to the office. Every time she went out for her medication, she would also pick up a week's worth of groceries and rarely left the house otherwise. By the time Ing Shui got home, it was late. Lucky Star heard her return and started whining from its cage, repeatedly banging its head against the bars. Ing Shui walked through the living room to the room where Lucky Star's cage was kept, turned on the light, and while taking off her coat, she comforted it. "Stop fussing. I know I haven't fed you all day. I got you some tuna-flavored dog food. I'll give it to you in a bit." Lucky Star whined long and pitifully, resting its head against the bars, gazing at Ing Shui for a long time. Ing Shui poured a full bowl of dog food into the food dish and refilled the automatic water feeder. Lucky Star stared at the food, showing no interest, and slowly lay down on the ground. Looking at Lucky Star, Ing Shui softly said, "Tomorrow is my sister's death anniversary again. Time really flies, doesn't it?" That night, after taking her medication, Ing Shui lay down on her bed in the bedroom. In the room next door, Lucky Star continued to whimper, its mournful and helpless sounds tugging at her heart. Maybe she was just too tired from the day, but Ing Shui felt a bit short of breath, and her mind went blank for a while. When she finally recovered, memories of 5 years ago flooded her mind. That was the day Ing Mei committed suicide, 8 months pregnant at the time. Back then, Ing Shui had just graduated from college, an inexperienced young woman interning at a small company. She rented a tiny room near her workplace, about 10 kilometers from her sister Ing Mei's place, but the two sisters didn't see each other often. That day, Ing Mei suddenly called and asked Ing Shui to meet. The place she chose shocked Ing Shui. It was a seafood buffet at a 5-star hotel. Looking back, Ing Shui regretted not realizing how unusual it was. Each person's meal cost 400 yuan, and her sister paid, without any expression on her face. Why didn't she think about how Ing Mei used to find even an 80 yuan pair of pants too expensive to buy online? She would walk a kilometer back to a vendor just to retrieve the 2 yuan she had been shortchanged while grocery shopping. She even kept her hair in a simple, old-fashioned style to save on hairdressing expenses, even though she wasn't even 30 yet. Why didn't Ing Shui notice how out of character her sister was that day? That day, Ing Mei's expression was unusually calm, so calm that Ing Shui found it difficult to understand. Ing Shui thought her sister just wanted to have a heart-to-heart chat, but Ing Mei remained silent throughout the meal. It wasn't until they were almost done eating that Ing Shui finally heard her sister sigh and say, "How many women in this world do you think will die because of marriage?" Ing Shui was taken aback by this sudden, out-of-the-blue question. She stared at her sister, unsure how to respond. Ing Mei lowered her eyes and gave a bitter smile. Women enter marriage to preserve love, yet most marriages have nothing to do with love. Even if there's a bit of love involved, it eventually gets worn down by arguments, calculations, and suspicion. Marriage is about cooperation, the maximum amount of compromise, and balancing what you give and receive. At this point, Ingmei paused, lowered her head to gently touch her belly, and said with a sorrowful expression, "But the time when a woman is most vulnerable isn't when she gets married, but when she is a child. And if she's foolish enough to quit her job and become a full-time mother, she's only completing the biggest devaluation of herself." So, Xiao Shui. Ingmei looked seriously at her shocked sister. "If you can support yourself in the future, don't get married. Date however you want, but don't get married." Ing Shui looked at her sister in disbelief. She couldn't understand why her sister was saying something so different from the life path she had always followed, especially since her sister's marriage had always been regarded as a model example by relatives and friends. Ingmei and her husband, Wu Liang, were medical school classmates. They had been together since their freshman year, always close and loving. After graduation, they got married and both were hired at one of the top hospitals in the city. Every day, they went to work together and returned home together, inseparable. Shortly after the wedding, her sister became pregnant. Since there were no elders at home to help, at Wu Liang's request, she quit her job to focus on her pregnancy. Although she had lost a prestigious job, her husband cherished her, and life was comfortable. Every time she visited her parents' home, she was always smiling, without a hint of negativity. After dinner that day, Ingmei handed a wooden box to Ing Shui, saying it was a gift for her, and solemnly instructed her to only open it the next day. 2 hours after the sisters parted, Ingmei, who had been a pharmacist before resigning, committed suicide at home. She ingested a large amount of two drugs that produced toxic effects when combined, and to trigger the reaction, she quickly drank half a bottle of 56-proof liquor, which successfully caused respiratory failure. Ingmei had calculated her time of death with precision. Wu Liang's plane landed at 8:30 p.m., and he would be home by 10. After confirming that her husband was in a taxi on his way home, she took the poison and passed away about half an hour before he arrived. Ingmei was dressed neatly, sitting on the living room sofa, her large belly prominent. In her hand was a tiny piece of baby clothing. When her husband found her body, he thought there was still hope, as she was still warm. Ingmei left without a word of explanation for why she had chosen to die. Ing Shui's father broke the news to her over the phone, delivering the message in just a few sentences before hurriedly hanging up to go make dinner for her younger brother. Ing Shui could barely detect any trace of emotion in her father's voice, while her own emotions were collapsing. She cried so hard, she could barely breathe. Ing Shui's family was far from typical. Her mother had passed away shortly after giving birth to her younger brother. Her father was extremely biased in favor of sons, and since Ing Shui had been prone to crying as a child, her father detested her and frequently scolded or hit her. Fortunately, she had her sister, who played with her, took care of her, and always shared everything, even splitting a candy in half for her. In some ways, Ingmei was not just a sister to Ing Shui, but also a mother. Later, Wu Liang personally came to their parents' home to apologize, explaining that his wife had suffered from severe depression during her pregnancy. He had taken her to see a doctor and reminded her to take her medication daily. Ingmei hadn't wanted to worry her family, so she had hidden her condition from them, but no one expected her sudden death due to the illness. The baby had already been so far along, yet was lost too. He blamed himself for not noticing the severity of her condition. At the time, Ing Shui fought hard to keep her composure, while her younger brother remained indifferent, engrossed in a mobile game. Her father merely offered some perfunctory sighs, as if the woman who had died was a neighbor's daughter, not his own. Before leaving, Wu Liang placed a bankbook on the table, saying it was the support money Ingmei had left for their father. Ing Shui watched as her father's grief vanished the moment he opened the bankbook. Every time Ing Shui thought of this moment, she couldn't help but be overcome with sorrow. Not long after, rumors began to spread that Wu Liang had long been involved with a female colleague at work and had already transferred all their marital assets in advance. Wu Liang had a relative who was a senior lawyer and had helped him draft an extremely harsh divorce property agreement. The plan was to force Ingmei to give birth and then propose a divorce. Otherwise, not only would she get no share of the assets, but her lack of a stable home and income would cause the child to be awarded to its father. Later, Ing Shui learned bit by bit from her sister's friends that at the time, even though Ingmei knew her husband's heart was no longer with her, she still hoped that he would remember their years of marriage and not push her to the brink. But just a week before her suicide, in order to force her to sign that property agreement, Wu Liang's family took turns verbally harassing her. Unable to endure the pressure any longer, Ingmei had tried to seek help from her own family. But what ultimately broke her spirit was hearing her father refuse her request to come back home. Shui thought, if only there had been a way for her sister to return home, maybe she wouldn't have resorted to such a terrible act, no matter how hard things got. She had no way out, so she sought an end. As Shui recalled this, she couldn't help but sob aloud. She cried, muttering to herself, "Why couldn't you just tell me the truth? Why was I so blind to your suffering? Why did I obediently wait and not open that box right away?" She cried herself to sleep as the effects of her medication set in. Around midnight, snow began to fall outside. Large flakes silently covered the ground, accumulating thicker and thicker. In the room where Lucky Star stayed, the window was left half open and the wind mixed with snow blew in, bringing in a biting cold. Lucky Star, unable to bear the chill, shifted restlessly in its cage, letting out hoarse, low growls. Shui slept soundly and didn't wake up until noon the next day. Seeing the thick snow outside, she remembered that she had left the window open in Lucky Star's room for ventilation the night before and had forgotten to close it. She hurried to the room to check. Inside the cage, Lucky Star let out a pitiful whimper when it saw her, sneezing repeatedly. Shui stood in front of the cage, watching in silence for a while, then poured some hot water into the dog's food bowl. Opposite the cage was a wooden cabinet, on top of which sat a black and white photo of Ingmei. In front of the photo was an incense burner. Shui lit 3 sticks of incense, respectfully bowed, and then began to carefully wipe the glass of the picture frame with a damp tissue. Afterward, she went out and started arranging the dried fruits, roasted chicken sausages, and various fruits she had bought the day before. Looking at the smiling face of her sister in the photo, Shui couldn't help but let her thoughts drift back to the past. After her sister's death, Shui opened the wooden box her sister had left behind and found inside some of the jewelry Ingmei used to wear. Only then did Shui realize that when her sister had met her, she had already known it would be their farewell. Shui clutched the box and cried bitterly once more. Not long after, Shui developed moderate depression. Her doctor advised her not to dwell too much in negative emotions and encouraged her to find things that could bring her joy. At the very least, she needed to shift her focus, learn something new, or engage in an activity. Otherwise, medication alone wouldn't be enough to help her condition. Shui was working as a clerk in a small company, where the job was easy and she had plenty of free time. So she followed the doctor's advice and chose to study a dry, uninspiring subject, computer science and technology. The course was expensive, and after covering rent and living expenses, Shui had barely anything left. She went to a pawn shop and pawned all the jewelry her sister had left her. That was how she managed to afford tuition and support herself. Among the jewelry, one piece played a crucial role in raising enough money: her sister's wedding ring. It was a platinum crown setting with a perfect 0.8 carat round diamond, and the inside of the band was engraved with her brother-in-law's initials. When Shui placed this wedding ring on the red velvet tray at the pawn shop, she recalled how her sister had once held up her hand, proudly showing off the ring on the day of her wedding. The joy and anticipation on her face back then had been so pure, so unhidden. But when Shui discarded this token of her sister's love, her expression was blank, without a trace of hesitation. For 2 whole years, Shui lived like a walking corpse. But in the end, she completed her studies with outstanding results. She realized that she had a natural aptitude for this field, and by the time she graduated, she had become quite skilled in computer and network operations. As a result, making money became much easier. After picking up freelance jobs with 3 different network companies, she quit her original job and rented this secluded little house, starting a reclusive life. Her father and younger brother stayed in their rural hometown, 200 kilometers away. Every 3 to 5 months, her father would call and ask her to come home for a visit. Shui knew all too well that her 2 closest relatives had no emotional need for her. They only wanted her to come back for money. Every time she returned, her father's routine was to endlessly bring up some well-off older man whom a family acquaintance had suggested as a match for her, counting on his fingers the bride price the man was willing to offer. Shui would listen without agreeing or disagreeing, leaving her father to sigh and complain about how hard life was. Her brother, who had been the one always competing with her for food and complaining about her as a child, had grown into a young man. He hadn't gotten into college and, at 26 years old, spent every day at home playing online games. Whenever he saw Ing Shui, it was as if he were looking through glass, completely ignoring her as he went about whatever he was doing. Ing Shui eventually thought that this detached family dynamic needed to change somehow, so during one of her visits home, she said to her father, "You see how hard it is to arrange a marriage these days. Now that my brother is grown, you should be considering some practical matters for him. He loves playing games so much. If he could marry a rich wife, he could save himself 20 years of struggle and live comfortably for the rest of his life." Her father had never seen Ing Shui show any concern for her beloved brother before. But hearing this, it hit exactly where he wanted. He stopped talking about older men proposing to her and turned to look at her with a serious expression. Ing Shui continued, "With our living conditions so poor and my brother unable to earn a living on his own, how could a girl from a wealthy family possibly want to marry him? If he ends up marrying a poor wife, his whole life will be burdened and you'll be stuck worrying and working yourself to the bone. Aren't there enough examples of this all around us?" "What can I do?" her father sighed, his voice lowering as he began to speak earnestly with her. "We only have a few acres of land. I'm not capable of much, and your brother has no education and can't do manual labor. That's why I was hoping you'd accept one of those proposals, so we could at least have another source of income for the family." Ing Shui sighed. "Even if I agreed, it would only be a one-time solution. If I really got married, it wouldn't be convenient for me to keep sending money home. In fact, I think there's another way. The latest trend in the city is using credit cards. You can rotate between 3 or 4 cards, using them to pay off each other. A friend of mine bought a house and a car this way." Her father looked at her skeptically. "I've heard that credit cards charge interest." Ing Shui replied, "That's why I'm his sister. Luckily, I just found a new job, and the pay isn't bad. I can help with the payments. Just follow my suggestion and get the cards first. You can rotate the payments, buy my brother a car, and get him some nice clothes. That way, the matchmakers can propose to families with better conditions. Once you have the card numbers, send them to me, and I'll help cover half the monthly payments. There's no need to worry. If my brother really finds a wealthy wife, her dowry will pay off the debt in one go." Her words made her father suddenly see things clearly. He nodded repeatedly in agreement, smiling widely as he walked Ing Shui to the gate when she left. Ing Shui looked back at him and said, "Since I'll be helping with the card payments, I'll have to take on extra work, so I won't be coming home unless it's really necessary." Her father stood behind her, repeatedly saying, All right. A year later, when Ing Shui returned home, she saw that her brother was already driving a car worth over 100,000 yuan. Their father had really managed to find him a girlfriend whose family owned a factory. To impress her parents, their father even sold the old family house and rented a 150 square meter apartment in the county. Each month, he used credit cards to pay for the car and the house, as well as to cover the costs of her brother's relationship with a girlfriend. After a period of observation, the girlfriend's family was very pleased with Ing Shui's brother, and the couple soon got engaged. Meanwhile, things started to unravel for Wu Liang, Ing Shui's former brother-in-law. 3 years after Ing Mei's death, a lengthy post suddenly appeared on various websites. The post, using real names, detailed how Ing Mei had suffered through her marital breakdown, how Wu Liang had been having an affair, how he transferred their marital assets, and how he pressured his wife into signing an unfair divorce agreement. It also described how he enlisted friends and family to verbally harass Ing Mei, leading to her emotional collapse and eventual suicide while pregnant. After her suicide, Wu Liang covered up the truth, claiming to the public that his wife had died due to prenatal depression. The post provided vivid, detailed descriptions of the events, making it feel as though the reader was witnessing everything firsthand. The psychological portrayal of Ing Mei was so authentic and touching that readers couldn't help but feel sorrow, mixed with rising anger. But that wasn't the end. The next day, more details surfaced in the post, including screenshots of QQ conversations between Wu Liang and his lover, photos of them snuggling during trips, and a series of love letters they had exchanged via email. The post also revealed their work addresses, home addresses, and personal phone numbers. The scandal caused an uproar, which lasted for 6 months. Wu Liang's workplace started an investigation into the matter, and progress was swift. Within a month, both Wu Liang and his lover were fired from their jobs. Afterward, they began receiving numerous harassing phone calls from outraged netizens, driving them to the edge of a breakdown. Unable to handle the pressure, Wu Liang's lover eventually broke up with him. Wu Liang tried to change his phone number and move several times, but each time, within a week, his new contact details were leaked and the calls would start again. Not long after, Wu Liang disappeared without a trace. His family reported him missing, and the police launched a search, but they never found him. These events concluded about a year ago, and it was after Wu Liang's disappearance that Ying Xue adopted Lucky Star. Ying Xue's memories finally came to a close. She turned and looked at the watchful eyes of Lucky Star in the cage, and a small smile crept across her face. She gently stroked the cage and softly asked, "Do you know why you're called Lucky Star?" A pair of terrified eyes stared back at Ying Xue from inside the cage. Ying Xue chuckled lightly, because when Ying Mei first started dating Wu Liang, she once told me that Wu Liang was her lucky star. Wu Liang told Ying Mei he would always take care of her, protect her, and love her forever. Lucky Star lowered its head, letting out a continuous whimper. Ying Xue crouched beside the cage, watching its occupant with great interest. Her voice was so gentle, it seemed like it could drip with sweetness. "Lucky Star, I really want to know if Wu Liang regrets two things. 1. Driving Ying Mei to her death with his affair. And 2. When he kidnapped and raped me a year ago." Lucky Star curled up tightly into a ball, burying its face beneath its body, not daring to show its face. Ying Xue didn't pay any attention and continued speaking to herself. "I spent 2 whole years studying computer networking, and of course, it wasn't just for fun, right? Once I learned those skills, hacking into other people's computers and accounts became as easy as pie. So, of course, I had to expose those 2 scumbags and their private conversations, where they plotted my sister's death. Why not bring it all to light for everyone to see, right? At first, I thought the punishment was enough, and I was ready to let it go. But who would have thought that filthy Wu Liang would track me down and then rape me?" As she said this, a tinge of sadness crossed Ying Xue's face. "That was my first time. It's a shame it was ruined by that beast." The sorrow on Ying Xue's face lingered for only a moment before vanishing completely. Looking at Lucky Star, she said seriously, "So, making him pay a little isn't too much, right?" Then, as if she had suddenly thought of something amusing, she burst into laughter. She laughed for a long time before continuing. "Scumbags are always so narcissistic. He actually believed my clumsy compliments and confessions. He really thought there would be a woman so stupid as to fall in love with the man who drove her sister to suicide and then raped her. If it weren't for his desire to make me his long-term lover, how else would I have had the chance to slip sleeping pills into his drink later?" Just as Ying Xue was speaking excitedly, her phone rang. She glanced at the number and pressed the speaker button, placing the phone next to the cage. From the phone came her father's anxious voice. "Xiao Xue, you haven't paid the credit card bill in 6 months. The car loan hasn't been paid either. And last month your brother bought some gaming gear on the card too. You know we've already sold the house, and all the money went into covering the last 2 years of expenses. Your brother and I are still renting in the county, and it's far too expensive. I can't keep up with the costs anymore. We've been calling you for days, but you never answer. When are you going to pay off these debts? And don't know who's been so cruel, but someone sent our credit card bills to your brother's girlfriend's family. They were furious. Now they're threatening to call off the engagement. Please, daughter, help us out. We've got nothing left to pawn. If this continues, your brother and I will be thrown in jail. Don't you understand? We're in serious trouble." Her father's voice was near hysterical, but Ying Xue's expression remained calm and indifferent. She picked up a purple sweet potato cake from the altar and slowly ate it, taking small bites. Only after finishing the last crumbs did she pick up the phone again and calmly reply, "Dad, life isn't always smooth sailing. I've faced challenges, and so did my sister. In the end, no matter what methods we used, whether good or bad, we solved them on our own. So today, you and my brother are no different. You'll have to rely on your own abilities to solve your problems." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Ying Xue, expressionless, hung up the phone, removed the SIM card, and snapped it in half before tossing it into the trash can at her feet. Perhaps it was the phone call that brightened her mood. Ying Xue turned back to Lucky Star in the cage and picked up a metal rod from beside the altar. When Lucky Star saw the rod, it cowered in fear, shrinking as far as it could into the cage and whimpering constantly. Ying Xue struck the bars of the cage a few times, then smiled sweetly at Lucky Star. Do you feel lighter now? No more pregnant wife waiting for you at home. No beautiful mistress clinging to you all day. Your limbs have been broken for so long that your muscles are already starting to atrophy. And as for your voice, it'll never come back. You can't walk or talk anymore, but don't let your brain go idle. You have plenty of time to reflect on your pitiful life, on your crimes and sins, and maybe you'll even regain your conscience. She paused, looking coldly at Lucky Star in the cage. But even if your conscience does return, what good will it do? After all, it's far too late for that. Wu Liang no longer exists in this world. He's gone forever, isn't he? Ing Shui stared icily at the cage. And you are Lucky Star? Sunlight streamed onto the large cage, inside of which lay a naked man, filthy and sprawled on the cold concrete floor. His arms and legs were bent in grotesque angles, and beneath his tangled hair, his bloodshot eyes were filled with hopelessness. His appearance was terrifying, more beast than human, and despite using all his strength to open his mouth, the only sound he could make was a beastly whimper.